Imagine being 6 years old when strangers arrive at your home, speak quietly with your father, and by sunset, you no longer belong to your family. You belong to Rome. No chains, no screams, no courtroom. Just a silent walk through the city gates, toward a temple where a fire burns that must never, ever go out. This is the story of the Vestal Virgins. In the heart of ancient Rome, just beside the forum where senators argued, merchants shouted, and crowds gathered, stood a circular temple unlike any other. There were no statues of gods inside, no grand altar, no audience. It was only a flame. It flickered day and night, summer and winter, through wars, plagues, and political chaos. Romans believed this fire was not just symbolic, it was the life of Rome itself. If it died, Rome would die with it. And the guardians of this fire were not soldiers, they were girls. The Vestal Virgins were priestesses of Vesta, the goddess of the hearth, home, and sacred fire. While other priests in Rome were powerful men from noble families, the most sacred religious duty in the entire empire belonged to 6 unmarried women who had sworn a 30-year vow of chastity. But the story of how they got there is even stranger. Every few years, the Pontifex Maximus, the high priest of Rome, later a title used by emperors themselves, would select young girls between the ages of 6 and 10 from elite Roman families. The girl had to be physically perfect, with both parents alive, and from a respectable lineage. She could not refuse. Her family could not refuse. The selection was considered the highest honor a Roman household could receive. Yet for the girl, it meant leaving everything behind. Her toys, her siblings, her mother's voice at night. She would walk into the Temple of Vesta and would not live at home. Again, for 3 decades, the Romans called this moment captio, the capture. Once inside the house of the Vestals, life transformed into ritual, discipline, and eerie responsibility. The primary duty of a Vestal Virgin was deceptively simple: keep the sacred fire burning. They worked in shifts, watching the flame constantly. If it weakened, they fed it carefully with specially prepared wood. If ashes built up, they cleaned them with ritual tools. If wind threatened it, they shielded it with their bodies. This was not ordinary firewood either. The wood had to be ritually pure. The flame could never be lit with common methods. If it accidentally went out, it had to be rekindled by focusing sunlight through a crystal lens, a sacred act meant to symbolize divine renewal. Why such obsession? Because Romans believed the flame represented the stability of the state. As long as it burned, Rome would stand. If it died, it meant the gods had abandoned them. And if the fire went out because of negligence, the Vestal on duty would be publicly whipped by the Pontifex Maximus himself, not in anger, not in cruelty, but as a sacred correction for a sacred failure. But tending the fire was only the beginning. The Vestals also guarded some of Rome's most important secrets. Deep inside their residence were sacred objects no one else was allowed to see. Among them, Romans believed, was the Palladium, a small wooden statue said to have been brought from Troy by Aeneas, the mythical ancestor of the Romans. As long as it remained in Rome, the city would be protected from destruction. No one outside the Vestals knew exactly where it was kept. They also prepared sacred offerings used in major state rituals, including the mola salsa, a salted flour mixture sprinkled on animals before sacrifice. Without this mixture, the ritual was invalid. In other words, Rome's religion literally could not function without them. And this gave the Vestals something unheard of for women in the ancient world: power. Unlike every other woman in Rome, Vestal Virgins were legally independent. They did not belong to a father, husband, or guardian. They could own property, write wills, and manage wealth. They had reserved seats at public games. When they walked through the streets, lictors cleared the way like they did for high officials. If a condemned prisoner accidentally crossed paths with a Vestal Virgin on the way to execution, his life was spared. Just by being there, they could pardon the condemned with a word. They traveled in carriages through the city, while other women walked. People lowered their eyes as they passed. To insult a Vestal Virgin was a crime punishable by death. They were revered, feared, and untouchable. But all of this privilege came with a terrifying condition. They had to remain virgins for 30 years. 10 years to learn. 10 years to perform. 10 years to teach the next generation. If a Vestal Virgin broke her vow, the punishment was so horrifying that even Romans whispered about it. But that story comes later. For now, imagine being a teenager inside this strange world. No marriage, no love, no family life, no children, no personal dreams. Your identity was swallowed by Rome's survival. You were watched constantly. Your behavior, speech, posture, and even facial expressions had to reflect purity. You could not laugh loudly in public. You could not dress carelessly. You could not be alone with a man. And yet, paradoxically, you were one of the most respected people in the empire. The Vestals lived in a large, elegant house with gardens and fountains beside the temple. They ate well, dressed in fine white robes, and lived in comfort compared to most Romans. But their life was one of constant pressure, ritual, and isolation. They belonged to no one, except the fire. Years passed like this. The young girl who entered at 6 grew into a woman who had never known normal life. She learned ancient prayers no one else remembered. She memorized rituals that had existed before Rome had marble streets. She understood secrets that senators would never hear. She watched emperors rise and fall. She saw generals celebrated and then executed. She witnessed Rome change, but the flame never changed. It burned the same. Steady. Demanding. Eternal. And she knew something no one else dared to say aloud. If that fire ever went out, they would blame her, not the gods, not fate. Her. By the time a Vestal reached her 20th year of service, she had become a living symbol. People looked at her and saw Rome itself pure, disciplined, eternal. Children were told to behave when Vestals passed. Soldiers bowed their heads. But inside, many Vestals began to feel something dangerous. They were human. They began to wonder what life outside the temple felt like, what it meant to love, what it meant to choose, what it meant to belong to someone instead of an idea. And that is where the true tension of the Vestal life began, not in the fire, not in the rituals, but in the silent war between duty and desire. Because Rome demanded purity not just in action, but in thought. And Rome had a terrifying way of dealing with Vestals, who forgot that. By the end of her 30 years, a Vestal Virgin was free to leave. She could marry, live a normal life, and enjoy enormous respect. But very few did. Why? Because after 3 decades inside the sacred walls, the outside world felt foreign. Many Vestals chose to remain in the house, training new girls, living out their days in quiet. Authority. They had become something more than women. They had become living relics, guardians of a fire that had burned since the city's mythical founding. A fire that could never go out, because if it did, Rome believed everything would collapse, and the responsibility for preventing that collapse rested on the shoulders of 6 women who had been taken from their homes before they even understood what Rome was. In Rome, the Vestal Virgins were untouchable until they weren't. For decades, a Vestal could walk through the forum and watch senators bow their heads. Crowds parted. Guards saluted. Even condemned criminals prayed to cross her path for a chance at mercy. But the same society that worshipped them was also waiting quietly, suspiciously, for a single mistake, because the higher Rome lifted the Vestals, the more violently it would punish them if they fell. The Romans had a word for the crime that terrified every Vestal. Incestum. This did not mean incest as we understand it today. It meant ritual impurity specifically, the breaking of the vow of chastity. To the Romans, a Vestal Virgin was not just a woman making a personal promise. She was a living symbol of the state's purity. If she was defiled, Rome itself was defiled. And if Rome was defiled, the gods would respond. So when disaster struck, plagues, military defeats, famines, strange omens in the sky, Romans sometimes asked a disturbing question. Had a Vestal Virgin broken her vow? This is where the story turns dark. Unlike ordinary criminal trials, accusations against Vestals were handled directly by the Pontifex Maximus. There was no jury, no public defense, no standard of proof like today. Often, the evidence was rumored. Sometimes political. Sometimes completely fabricated. Because accusing a Vestal could be a convenient way to explain a national crisis without blaming leaders, generals, or the emperor. The gods weren't angry at Rome. They were angry at her god. One of the most famous cases occurred in 114 BCE. Rome had suffered military setbacks. Strange natural events had frightened the population. Fear spread through the city like smoke. People whispered that something was wrong at the spiritual heart of Rome. Soon, 3 Vestal Virgins were accused: Aemilia, Licinia, and Marcia. No one knew exactly what they had done. No witnesses, no confessions, just suspicion. At first, they were acquitted. But public panic didn't calm down. People demanded answers. The case was reopened under political pressure. This time, they were condemned. What happened next would become one of the most chilling rituals in Roman history. Rome did not execute Vestal Virgins in the usual way. They could not be stabbed, burned, or publicly killed. Their blood could not be spilled. That would be sacrilege. Instead, the Romans created a punishment designed to be technically merciful while being psychologically horrifying. A small underground chamber was prepared just outside the city walls near the Colline Gate. Inside the chamber were a bed, a lamp, and a small amount of food and water. The condemned Vestal was dressed in her sacred robes. She was led through the streets in complete silence. Crowds watched, but no one spoke. No one cried. No one intervened. She walked as if in a funeral procession, but she was still alive. When they reached the chamber, she descended a ladder into the darkness. The ladder was removed. The entrance was sealed with earth. She was buried alive, not killed by Rome, left to the gods. This ritual allowed the Romans to claim they had not shed sacred blood. The gods would decide her fate. In reality, she would die slowly, alone, in total darkness. And the man accused of being her lover? He was publicly beaten to death in the Forum. No mercy, no ritual dignity, because he had polluted Rome's most sacred institution. Imagine the psychological terror this created inside the house of the Vestals. 6 women living together, knowing that any whisper, any rumor, any political crisis could suddenly turn them from revered priestesses into condemned criminals. They were watched constantly, not just by priests, but by society itself. Their movements were monitored, their interactions scrutinized, their lives lived under invisible surveillance. And yet, they were human. They formed friendships. They laughed quietly. They had thoughts they dared not speak. Some historians believe that many Vestals lived in constant anxiety, knowing how fragile their honor truly was, because once accused, innocence did not guarantee safety. There were also cases where Vestals were accused for reasons that had nothing to do with love. Sometimes, powerful men desired their wealth or property. Sometimes, political rivals needed a scapegoat. Sometimes natural disasters demanded a spiritual explanation. The Vestals became convenient answers to Rome's fears. A lightning strike? A Vestal must be impure. A lost battle? The fire must have been neglected. A plague? Someone in the temple must have angered the gods. The burden of Rome's anxiety rested on 6 women who had never chosen this life. Yet not all. Vestals were victims. Some were incredibly strong, intelligent, and politically influential. One Vestal, named Tuscia, was accused of breaking her vow. To prove her innocence, she performed what Romans believed was a miracle. She carried water from the Tiber River in a sieve, tool full of holes, and arrived at the temple without spilling a drop. Neither this actually happened or was legend. The story spread across Rome as proof that the gods protected the innocent. She was acquitted. Another Vestal, Claudia, faced accusations when her family's reputation was under attack. She publicly prayed and pulled a massive ship stuck in the mud with a single rope, again proving divine favor. These stories were likely exaggerated, but they show how Romans believed the gods would visibly defend a pure Vestal. Because if a Vestal was truly innocent, Vesta herself would intervene, at least. That's what people hoped, but fear never disappeared. Every time a Vestal walked past the underground burial site outside the city walls, she knew what waited there, not a prison, a grave, prepared specifically for someone like her. And this knowledge shaped how Vestals lived carefully, quietly, obediently. Almost unnaturally composed, they became masters of self-control, because losing control meant losing life. Itself, the irony, is impossible to ignore. The Vestals had more legal freedom than any other women in Rome. They owned property. They influenced politics. They commanded respect from emperors. Yet they lived under the strictest personal control imaginable. They were powerful and powerless at the same time, revered and terrified, honored and imprisoned, all for the sake of a flame that symbolized Rome's survival. And then came an even stranger twist, by the time Christianity began spreading through the empire. People started asking dangerous questions. Why were women guarding a pagan fire? Why did Rome's safety depend on a ritual older than memory? Why were these priestesses still buried alive in a civilized empire? The world was changing, and the Vestal Virgins, unchanged for centuries, were about to face a threat they had never imagined. Not accusation, not scandal, but irrelevance. For nearly 1,000 years, the flame in the Temple of Vesta had never gone out. It had survived invasions, civil wars, assassinations, mad emperors, and collapsing governments. It burned Rome was a small cluster of huts. It burned when Rome ruled the known world, and through all of it, 6 women stood beside it. But in the 4th century AD, something far more dangerous than war reached the heart of Rome. A new belief, a new god, and a new idea that would make the Vestal Virgins obsolete. Christianity did not arrive in Rome with swords. It arrived quietly, spreading through homes, markets, and soldiers' barracks. At first, Romans ignored it. Then they mocked it. Then they persecuted it. And then, slowly, emperors began to convert. When Emperor Constantine legalized Christianity in 313 AD, the religious foundation of Rome began to shift. Pagan temples still stood. Old rituals still continued. The Vestals still watched their fire. But for the first time in history, people began asking, why does this fire matter? Christians did not believe Rome's safety depended on a goddess of the hearth. They did not believe in sacred flames or ancient statues from Troy. They believed in one God, invisible and all-powerful, and that belief quietly undermined everything the Vestals represented. For decades, the Vestals continued their duties, but their influence faded. Fewer people bowed as they passed. Fewer offerings came to the temple. The forum itself grew quieter as political. Power moved elsewhere. The fire still burned. But fewer people believed it meant anything. And then came Emperor Theodosius, a devout Christian, a man determined to erase paganism from Rome completely. In 391 AD, Theodosius issued a series of laws banning pagan worship across the empire. Temples were closed, rituals forbidden, sacrifices outlawed. And for the first time in nearly a millennium, the Temple of Vesta was ordered to shut its doors. No ceremony, no farewell, no public mourning, just imperial command. The fire must be extinguished. Imagine that moment. A Vestal Virgin, perhaps one who had served for 20 years standing before the sacred flame. She had guarded since childhood. A flame she had fed, protected, and treated as the heartbeat of Rome. And now, she was told to let it die, not because of neglect, not because of failure, but because the world no longer believed in it. There are no detailed records of how the fire was put out. Historians believe it was simply allowed to burn down to ashes. No one rekindled it. No one replaced the wood. For the first time since Rome's mythical founding, the Temple of Vesta went dark, and nothing happened. The city did not collapse. The sky did not fall. The gods did not strike. And in that silence, the true power of belief became clear. The Vestal Virgins were dismissed. Some were given small pensions. Some returned to distant relatives. Some likely remained in Rome, living quietly, unrecognized in a city that no longer needed them. For women who had once commanded the respect of emperors, this was a strange, quiet ending. No scandal, no burial chamber, no public shame, just irrelevance. They had dedicated their lives to guarding Rome's soul. And Rome had simply moved on. The house of the Vestals fell into disrepair. The temple roof collapsed over time. Statues were stolen or broken. The sacred objects they once guarded vanished into history. Archaeologists today have found the ruins beside the Romang Forum, empty rooms, broken columns, silent courtyards where Vestals once walked in white robes, but the fire pit is still there. Hollow circle where the flame once lived. Cold. What makes the story of the Vestal Virgins so haunting is not just their power or their punishments. It is the realization that for centuries, an entire empire believed its survival depended on 6 women and a flame. Generations were raised with that belief. Wars were fought with that belief. Laws were written with that belief. And then, one day, people simply stopped believing. The Vestals did not fail. The belief system around them did. Yet their legacy is extraordinary. They were among the only women in the ancient world with legal independence. They influenced politics without holding office. They could save lives with a word. They lived outside the control of fathers and husbands in a society built on male authority. They were symbols of purity, but also of power. They lived in privilege, but under constant threat. They were honored like royalty, but punished like criminals if they slipped. They were both sacred and trapped. Perhaps the strangest part of their story is this. Many Vestals, after completing their 30 years, chose not to marry. After decades of living for Rome, ordinary life felt unfamiliar. The world outside the temple walls felt loud, chaotic, and uncertain. Inside, they had purpose. Outside, they had freedom. And freedom, after a lifetime of ritual, can feel terrifying. Today, tourists walk past the ruins of the Temple of Vesta without realizing what once stood there. Few know that the most sacred responsibility in ancient Rome belonged not to generals or emperors, but to 6 girls taken from their homes before they understood what Rome was. Girls who grew into women, who carried the weight of an empire's spiritual survival, all because of a flame A flame that burned for nearly 1,000 years. A flame that outlived kings, dictators, and wars out a flame that finally died, not because it failed, but because people stopped believing it mattered. And that is the true story of the Vestal Virgins. Not just guardians of a fire doubt, but guardians of an idea so powerful that an entire civilization trusted its fate to them until the day it didn't.